Hey everybody, and welcome to our very first episode of the Mars Manifesto. This channel was created to fill this enormous gap that I found online for a sort of certain generation of men and women, or the women who love the men in those generations. And the answers that I just wasn't really finding on YouTube and through websites, blogs, all that stuff. This channel was created to kind of address all of the things that seem to be just not there. I think the age of the internet has sort of skipped over boomers and sort of slightly pre-boomer generations, and the advice is mostly out there for millennials and younger sort of internet savvy people. And I think it's such a super important age group to cover because there's so many of you guys out there, and a lack of communication. And I wanted to talk to you, my friend John here, about sort of the generational differences in how we communicate in relationships and the expectations of sort of society on those generations, and particularly men. This channel is built around how men think and how we can communicate better with men, because I feel like sometimes, especially now with all of this Me Too movement and feminism, that men who really do want to express themselves kind of get lost in the mix and don't feel like they have a voice. So I really wanted to change that with my channel. So welcome, John.
Hey, it's good to be here. So we're talking Cowboy Myth.
So that's one of the best places that I can think to start is the Cowboy Myth, because it sort of stems from the childhood westerns, and TV shows that sort of perpetuate this idea. So why don't you go ahead and talk about it?
So in American culture, something that's been quite pervasive, and it's certainly within my generation and generations that are older, was this glamorization of what was a tough time in America, but through movies and TV, we created this cowboy myth. So whether it was Shane or Clint Eastwood, his characters, Outlaw Josie Wells or John Wayne, there was this romantic notion of all you need is your horse and your rifle, and you're on the plains, and you're independent, and you can do what you want.
It's a lot of freedom out there.
You can live off the land, or live off of what you can hunt. You can show up on a ranch, work a while, and move on to the next ranch. You can love a woman and leave her. I mean, there was all of these stories of cowboys, and it's been quite romanticized. I mean, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and At a Place, and on and on. So I think that especially for those of us that are, maybe 45 and up for sure, we held that as a certain version of reality. And so in a relationship, you could love them and leave them, and that was almost cool to do, right?
Right.
And so what happened with that character is that character went from the great wide open plains, the westerns, into the cities, and it became the rogue cop. So Clint Eastwood went from his westerns into
Dirty Harry
movies. Now you see sort of the rogue ex-SEAL type soldier, right? And the Mark Wahlberg characters and on. So this character still exists, and this character and the way they deal with women is still very much a part of Hollywood. It's still very much a part of what TV series is about. Another great one that has been extremely popular, that 7 seasons, is Ray Donovan. That character as well. So getting into character and what that's all about is that men are we don't need anybody else. We're stronger if we don't need anybody else. We don't need to say much because we don't want to reveal what we're really thinking, right? And women are just objects to sort of, we pass through their lives, but we never commit to anything, because committing to a woman is a sign of weakness. Having children will hold you down. It will keep you from realizing what you really want to do with your life. So security in terms of a family unit with a kid and a wife, or just a wife, or even a committed relationship, is sort of opposed to this cowboy myth concept, which in America is still very pervasive.
Yes.
So, cowboy myth and how women deal with it, which is realizing that this has been a cultural part of this generation of men, and they're bringing that into the relationship. Yep. And it's very attractive in some ways. I think it's really kind of fun and adventurous. This
for a
strong
minute,
type for a minute.
For a minute, it's fun, and then it gets really old. I mean, so as a woman who dates sort of older guys older than me, within that sort of age range, it's a difficult concept for us to sort of understand, and even women of your generation, it's hard to understand because, we're nurturers and we were taught to hold on and keep things together and cohesive. And we have all these expectations that we're going to kind of hold down the fort and make sure everything's okay. So then we have this sort of male perspective fighting with what women are taught to do. And it's like, well, now what? How do we proceed with communication and having a relationship when we almost expect men to just get up and leave at any time without warning?
So, I mean, in trying to be fair to women, and we get into some other kind of topics of conversations, we will. I think for this cowboy myth, let's keep it simple. So let's give the man what he wants, but still get maybe what you want. Okay, so keep it simple. And I kind of use the dog analogy sometimes. Men are dogs. Not that in that context, but, okay, cowboy, feed him, love on him, let him have his sleep and his rest, and let him be your hero.
Yeah.
Let him be that hero. I mean, if he wants to step up and protect you, let him do that and validate him for that. I think in general, women need to understand that managing the relationship and being really a big part of men's lives is understanding that, they can be simpler, at least in how they verbally communicate, right? They need a simpler kind of structure with you, or a simpler kind of interaction a lot of times with you because they aren't as well equipped to verbally communicate. And so back to the cowboy myth, which is, the strong silent type, right? Most of those characters didn't. Yeah. And that's just embedded, I think, in American culture with a lot of these men that you guys are having relationships with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really fascinating that it's almost a subconscious thing. All the TV shows growing up were like that, and not just cowboy shows. I mean, if you look at even regular sitcoms where the woman is at home, she's taking care of the kids, they're brushed and washed, and dinner's on the table. By the time he gets home, he goes out and has crazy antics, while she's at home. She's like, hey, honey, what happened today? He's like, ha, ha.
Mom, I'm home.
Exactly.
Or not, honey,
I'm home.
Honey, I'm home.
Like, ha, ha, ha. He'll never believe this, and I'm not going to tell you what happened. But me and the guys did all this stuff while you were at home doing the other stuff for me. I mean, it's hard for...
The Graduate is another great one.
Oh, that's a really good example.
The Graduate is maybe one of the best.
Yeah.
And that was sort of addressing the transition to some of this.
Yeah. So I guess my question for you in this is, if a woman my age is with a man who is of the generation where the cowboy myth is very prevalent and is obviously impacting the behavior of the relationship, is there anything that can be done, or is that just sort of how guys are? Like, is that something that can be not trained out of somebody, but can a woman show a man that this is what's going on and it's not necessarily reality?
Engage in the other types of communication, not just verbal, because verbal is going to be what he gets challenged with. Engaged in just just a brief touch, right? Or it's do something, it's the chocolate chip cookies or dinner, right?
Those always work. And chocolate chip cookies always work.
Engage in that. I mean, people will, sex. I mean, sex is a big time form of communication, and it can really open him up. Or physical intimacy doesn't actually have to be sex, but physical intimacy. So it's other ways, going on a walk together, other ways of communicating that aren't just strictly verbal.
Yeah.
Getting to verbal. So getting the cowboy to verbal. At some point, the cowboy's going to want to talk to somebody. He's getting tired of being alone.
We hope so. Maybe if you get enough tequila in him, he'll open up a little bit there. So another question that goes along with the cowboy myth is, when trying to get a cowboy to engage as a woman, and not just like with touch and communication sexually, like how can she sort of manage the relationship to kind of help him understand the safety and the trust that's there, and instead of making him kind of want to run away?
Yeah, I think it's back to those other forms of communication, and allowing some space,
which is a huge thing for men.
It's allowing some space, and also getting into relationships with men that are healthy. Just knowing when to get out. Sometimes some of these guys are hopeless. They're just not, as much as you think you want them, they're not going to be capable of a fulfilling longer-term relationship.
Do you think that men notice within themselves when they've sort of reached their maximum capacity to give in a relationship? Like, when it's time to get on your horse and ride out, or is that sort of a subconscious thing? I think
it's both, and I've said this before. Men are thinking about these things just as much. They're just not acting on them, and they're maybe not telling, certainly their significant other. They're not wanting to talk to them, but they're talking to other men, usually to some degree. But they're certainly thinking, and they're certainly aware. And if anything, they're feeling guilty because they're not engaging in dealing with it and talking about it. And it gets back to something I think we've maybe said before, which is, some social scientists are saying it takes about 2 1.5 hour sessions a week to really verbal, you have to be intimate verbally and physically at least for an hour and a half a week to really work through what a relationship needs.
And we all know how much men like to have 1.5 hour conversations with their partners about their relationship.
Hard as hell to do. So you sort of have, different ways you kind of do that. So it might be, 30 minutes of actual verbal, but then there might just be an hour where you're like literally sitting next to each other, going to read a book or watching something, but you're right there with each other. And you're very close.
It's a physical intimacy without intimacy.
Exactly. And you just sort of both know that you're there and it's okay.
Yeah.
With the verbal, you gotta have the verb, gotta have it.
So my last question for you is: do you think that this cowboy myth is almost like a plague on the generation? Is this something that most guys are affected with?
It's just not. I mean, there's only certain times in certain circumstances where being a lone, quiet, force with a 6-shooter, sure that can work if you're on a stakeout, if you're a detective, or sometimes it's in a business meeting. It's good just to shut up and stare.
Right.
They don't know what you're thinking. There are times when that serves you. On the other side of the tennis court when you're not saying much, that serves you. But no, it's just not. It's the cowboy myth. It truly is a myth. It's not really going to serve you in a relationship. Now well, I will say this though. Sometimes women want their men quiet and strong. Yeah, but in general, the cowboy myth is really a curse. It's just not. It's not going to serve us.
I would compare this to the rom-com curse that women inflict on men too. I mean, there's that whole genre of the perfect man in movies that we get saddled with at an early age. Particularly my generation. I'm a Zennial, so I'm like between Z and millennials. We're in that beautiful age of before the internet in childhood, and then the internet as teenagers. So we had this great childhood where all these sort of idealized relationships and romantic comedies, Notting Hill, these movies where it's a fairy tale ending, and men are these broken guys who come in, and
there's so much of that.
They fall in love with this woman, and they miraculously change, right? So our generation and most women look at these movies and go, "Well, I could change him." You know, this is something that we're inundated with psychologically.
People are not going to change. So when very rapidly,
when you have rom-com guys in one sex, and then you have the Cowboys, with the men, it's like this really ridiculously impossible mashup of expectations that the film industry has created.
Well, I mean, look at probably the biggest rom-com star on the men's side, which is Hugh Grant,
right?
Which I find interesting as hell to watch. He's a really interesting guy, and he deserves his accolades, but he stutters.
Yeah, he does.
Right, so he's this stuttering,
goofy, normal-looking guy,
kind of man, right?
Yeah.
So, look, what you need, what you ladies need is a cowboy a cowboy who can talk.
Yeah, but finding one is the whole other issue, right? I think the bottom line of this, this conversation is, understanding from your partner on both sides that there are so many unrealistic expectations put out generationally through media and, films and through just sort of like societal pressures that aren't real. It's not a realistic expectation of a normal functioning person in a relationship.
These are the myths and the legends, and they're fun to watch. And
there are no perfect people.
They have a basis in truth, but no.
There are no perfect people. There are no perfect relationships. And the whole target of all these conversations is going to be to sort of work through all of these issues and try to understand better across gender lines, how we can communicate and sort of debunk these cowboy myths and rom-com myths and sort of figure out how to communicate as people in general. So I hope that you guys stick around, subscribe to this channel because it's going to be awesome. And thanks for being here. John, you're going to be on a few more episodes with me, so I'm really looking forward to
it. And I got my horses haven't had water in a while, so I got to.
So you got to go. We'll see you guys next time.
All right.